we'll go back to the frame. At this point, we're going to take out the slide lock, which is right here, and we'll do it like so. If you look inside, you can see a little flat piece of thin metal right here, which is made of spring steel. It's what holds the tension on the slide lock. It pushes it up. So in order to defeat it, we're going to need to push it down. You can use the firing pin actually has this little flat kind of blade on the very end of it, if you can see that. You can turn it edgewise and then put it right down in there and depress that piece of spring steel enough to allow that slide lock to drop out of the side of the gun. It moves down about a 1/4 inch and then just falls out of the side of the gun. Like so. Well, there we go. So there's your slide lock. That comes out. That little piece of spring steel doesn't come out. It stays in the frame. We're down to the last piece, which in my opinion is the hardest piece. It's the magazine release, which is this button right here on the side. That whole thing will come out. You can kind of see it's rectangular shaped over here, and the whole thing will actually come out of this side. In order to make that happen, if you look down in the magazine well, you can see the slide release. If you move back and forth, you can see a piece of wire that sticks straight up in this particular part of the handle, and it moves back and forth like this. And if you just look down in there and push the magazine release button a few times, you can figure it out. You can use this part of the trigger bar. If you stick it down in there, you can use this little wing of the trigger bar to reach under that. Let's say if we're looking in the gun this way, we've got a little piece of wire here. We're going to reach under it with this trigger bar here, just like this, and get behind it, and then just pop it straight out like that. Once we do that, the magazine release will come out of that side of the gun. Just bear with this, it's a little difficult. The best way I found to do it is to get as high up towards this part of the gun with the trigger bar, the little tool you're using, to get as high up on that piece of wire as you can to get as much leverage as possible. But if you just be patient with it and kind of finesse it, you'll be able to pry it up from that flat part of the magazine well. So this is a good thing to do if you have maybe gone to the range and forgotten your range bag for the day, and it had your gun working on tools in there, and you have a malfunction of some sort, some major piece breaks inside of your gun, and you need to take it apart. Or, I mean, if you just want to impress your friends, make a bar bed or whatever. That's being stubborn. I know it sounds really bad. It sounds like stuff is breaking, but it's actually not. Ah, there we go. Once you pop it out of there, you can pull the trigger bar out. And then, like I said, you can see the magazine release protruding from right here. You can just pull it straight out of the side of the gun. So you got your magazine release out of the frame, and that's everything. The frame is entirely stripped. You've got all your little bits and pieces here. You've got your slide and your barrel and your recoil spring. The only other thing left to strip is the magazine. We'll take it, and then that other, not the firing pin, but the rod that sits behind the firing pin in the slide is what we use to break this down. If you see on the magazine, there's a little button right here that you can depress. So the way we're going to take this apart is to depress that button and then push with the rod. We're going to push the floor plate that way. When you do so, be careful. It takes a little effort, but when you do so, it'll pop loose. And then once you get it popped loose, be careful, because the contents of this magazine are under pressure. And if you just pop that floor plate off, everything will come shooting up out of there. So just push it off with your thumb, but keep your thumb in place, and then hold that stuff down. Out of there will come the floor plate right here, the floor plate backer, which is this piece right here. And then your spring comes out, followed by the follower, oddly enough. That just pops off of the end of the spring. So that's that. And then you can notice this spring has one kind of wider end here, and then one narrower end here. The narrow end is the end that the follower goes on. So when you're ready to put the magazine back together, just pop the follower on. Follower goes up in the magazine. The backer compresses the spring, and you hold that down with your thumb, and then the floor plate slides back on. And that's probably the easiest part of this gun. So your magazine's back together, you can set it aside. And so basically reassembly is just disassembly in reverse. But we're going to put together the slide first because we need the pins from the frame in order to put the slide together. So we're going to start by reassembling our firing, I'm sorry, not our firing pin, our other pin, which is not the firing pin. Somebody comment and tell me what that thing is called because I don't know. So again, you just find the spring. There's pretty much three springs here. There's a big one, a medium one, and a small one. This is the medium one. You just pop it right over. There's a little nipple on the end of that rod. Just pop it over that nipple. And then you've got your little plastic piece that goes in the end of it. Don't forget that plastic pad that goes in the end of that spring. It just sits right in there. And then that's assembled. So we'll get the silver plunger and the small spring. Your silver plunger is the piece that you pushed down on earlier. It's got a little hole in the top here, and that small spring just pushes into that hole. If you just stick it in the hole and then compress it, you can hear it click. Just a tiny little tick, and it pops in there. So that's done. We'll go ahead and drop that back in this big hole in the bottom of the slide. Just drop it right in there. And then find your extractor, which is the flat black piece. If you notice on the extractor, you've got one end which is cylindrical, this end here, and then you've got one end which is flat. That's the part that actually grabs the casing and pulls it out. So you want to take that and put it in with a cylindrical end toward the rear sight. If you're shooting the gun, you've got it like this. Here's your rear sight, here's your front sight. The cylindrical end will actually go in the rear sight side. In order to do that, just depress that plunger like you did earlier. Once you hold it down and just drop the extractor in, and then just let go of the plunger, and it's in there. And then we'll put the other rod back in the back of it. Now we're gonna stop there for right now, and then we're gonna move back to our slide. In order to put the slide together, we've got to start with the magazine release. Like I said, it's just like this, but in reverse. Grab your trigger bar. If you can see that little piece of wire, it's kind of sitting up there. You can reach in there with the trigger bar and grab the top of it, and then just pry it outward. This part's easier than taking it apart was, but just pry that outward, and then reach in there with your, pry it out enough for the magazine release piece to slide behind it. Again, that's made of spring steel, so it's really hard to bend it such that it won't work anymore. But once you slide your magazine release back in there, just reach in there with your trigger bar, and you're going to need to push that piece of wire toward this side of the gun in order for it to fall in place and catch the magazine release. Which again is not hard, it's just a very simple push. Once you got it, once you hear that click, just push the magazine release button a few times, and it'll let you know that it's done by feeling right. You can tell that it's done right. So we'll move on to the slide lock, which is this flat little piece right here that we took out earlier. Again, we're going to grab our firing pin. Use that flat blade to compress the little piece of spring steel. We're actually going to stick the slide lock in first, not all the way under the piece of steel, but just to the edge of it, so that when we do get it compressed, it'll be easier to slide in there. Just slide it in there and it'll pop in place and go back to its default position, which is toward the top. So once you've got that done, we're going to reassemble our trigger assembly. You'll want to find this triangular kind of plastic piece, and then your flat bar. The one I said was, this one is 3.5 pounds. It's got just a little flat little slot right there on one side with a groove that the bar fits into on one side. The L shape of this bar will just go right in there. So you just put it in there and push it in, and it should slide flush. So then find your little spring. This is the spring, the only stretchy spring. And then you'll just hook it, starting from the inside, just hook it on the back of that plastic triangle. Then you'll catch it with this hook here. Just hold it like it looked when it came apart, and put it back together. That's the simplest way I can tell you to do it. Just pop a little slide in, rotate that spring forward, and again we're going to rotate this wing, into its little slot on the side of the rear trigger assembly, which can just take a little bit of finesse, which is, no big deal. Once you put it in there, it'll feel a little bit sloppy. It'll kind of sit funny. You can see normally it sits like this, but before you put it in the gun, it just kind of sits kind of sloppy, which is fine. It'll fix itself when you put it back together, which we'll do now. So once you've got that reassembled, just take the back part of the slide, the back part of the trigger assembly, and drop it right in the gun, right in the frame rather. And then the trigger, you can see the hole the trigger goes down in. Just put that trigger in there. It's awful hard to mess that up. But there it is. You can see if you look at the trigger, it looks right from how it's sitting in the frame.